For years. My childhood sweetheart who I had a crush on invited me to a candlelight dinner on his own initiative. The hint was very obvious. Your legs are really amazing. With a slight tipsy feeling. Just as my clothes were half taken off. The door was forcefully opened and his friends rushed in. My childhood sweetheart laughed loudly. I said it would be extremely easy to seduce her. He proudly stuffed the bets into my hands. Rob the rich to help the poor. Now you don't have to worry about your dad's medical expenses. I calmly put on my clothes and stretched out my hand to his friends. I won. Double. Sean said that this was the first time he had cooked since he was 25 years old. I looked at the neatly arranged four dishes and one soup on the table under the dim light. Pine nut and corn. Pork tripe and chicken soup. They are all from that restaurant 3 kilometers away. He came closer and shook the wine glass. Joy. Do you like me? I just smiled, and didn't say anything. But he seemed to have gotten the answer as he curved his lips. He reached out and pulled me into his arms. His breath mixed with the smell of alcohol slid inch by inch into my neck. You don't say anything. I also know that you only like me. As he said this, his hand had already started to stroke up along the hem of my skirt. I just stared steadily at the shadow under the crack of the door of the guest bedroom. As the off-shoulder top was pulled to my arm by him, his sucking wandered on my skin. I could feel his breathing gradually becoming turbid and heavy. The lake surface that had been calm for a long time in my heart started to ripple again. As my clothes were half taken off, I couldn't help but clench my palm. Sean, this is the last chance I give you and myself. His murmur with heat fell on my ear, making my face burn. Joy. Help me take it off. He took my hand and brought it to the buttons of his shirt to undo them. When the hem of his shirt was pulled out by me with a blushing face, he suddenly stood up. Clap, clap, clap. He restrained his smile and clapped 3 times. The incandescent light suddenly turned on. The fire that had just ignited in my heart was also extinguished like being doused by a heavy rain. Bitterness spread instantly. Laughter came from all directions. His group of friends rushed out from the second bedroom. Their mobile phones were taking pictures of me. Among them was his ex-girlfriend Yvonne, looking at me with a flirtatious look. Sean frowned slightly and stood in front of me. Come on. Taking pictures is going too far. With his back to me, he laughed a little loudly. I said it would be extremely easy to seduce her. It's you who didn't believe me. Admit defeat and pay up quickly. Cash. Those people laughed and slapped the stack of cash into his hands one after another. Sean turned around and gently stuffed it into me with a gentle smile on his face. Rob the rich to help the poor. Now you don't have to worry about your dad's medical expenses. He even took the time to lift up my collar and casually tucked my messy hair behind my ear. Only I know that he has completely killed the last bit of my liking for him. Okay. Go in first. Let Joy get dressed. He pushed everyone towards the second bedroom. Yvonne gave him a look. He coaxed in a soft voice. I didn't do anything. When everyone went in, he came over and looked at me. It was just a small bet. Don't take it too hard. I said I would help your dad. There was not the slightest hint of apology on his face. Instead, he was as calm as usual. That little money of yours is just a small amount. I know you need it urgently. You don't have to pay me back. As he spoke, he walked towards the dining table. Clean up before you leave and take it down on the way. He looked down at his shirt. The chest was wrinkled and there were some lipstick marks on it. He simply took it off and threw it on the ground. Throw this away too. After saying that, he seemed to think of something and looked at me. Joy. No matter how much you like me, restrain yourself a bit. Girls still have to love themselves a bit. I just sat there without moving. There was not a trace of emotion on my face. Even though my heart was already thundering and raining at this moment. It was so damp that a layer of moss had grown. I just nodded slightly. You know everything. He was stunned for a moment and casually combed his hair. I know. I also like you. But it's not to the extent of love. You know it too. I like someone like Yvonne. He spoke loudly as if he was afraid that the people inside wouldn't hear. Of course I know. I have seen the way he chased Yvonne to the airport 2 years ago and cried heartbreakably. Since their breakup, he still misses getting back together. I looked sideways at the door of the second bedroom. It's not hard to guess how seriously those people were listening by pressing their ears against the door. I stuffed all the cash in my hand into my bag. I stood up and slowly smoothed out the wrinkles on my skirt. I walked over and pulled open the door forcefully. The people inside didn't expect it and all rushed out. The first one was Sean's good friend Todd. The carefree air of a chain supermarket. I reached out and grabbed his tie. He almost fell onto me because he wasn't prepared. Be careful. Sean frowned and rushed over. But when he heard my words, he stopped abruptly. I whispered softly in Todd's ear. The volume was just right for everyone to hear. He said I should love myself. What should I do? I want to sleep with everyone tonight. Todd's hand just rightfully wrapped around my waist. Sure. Dude. I'm not a gentleman. The eyes of the others were also wandering on me. Sean's face instantly became ugly. 3 until I got into Todd's car. Sean's face still didn't look good. He folded his arms and watched me sit obediently, letting Todd lean over to fasten my seat belt. He snorted. Joy. Is this? I didn't even look at him. Bat? Guess how many times he can do it in one night. Sean Kirsten punched heavily on the roof of the car. Get out. He reached out to pull the car door. His face was as cold as ice. Yvonne smiled and hung on him. You are being a bit nosy. He hesitated and said, she is different from us. I don't want her to regret it. I still didn't move at all. I didn't even spare him a glance. Todd also said with a smirk, dude. It's all consensual. If you keep blocking, it won't be interesting anymore. Right? But Sean looked at him coldly. You play yours. I won't stop you. Can't you see that she is deliberately trying to anger me? It was a little funny for me to look at him, even if it is. You don't have to block. Sean. I am an adult. Me? But he was relentless and wanted me to get out of the car. What are you angry with me about? Isn't it just a bet with you? Isn't it enough that your dad's medical expenses are solved? Tell me what you lost. The muscles on his arm holding the card were tense. But all I could hear was the silence in my heart. The person who had lived in my heart for many years was gradually walking away. He knew it clearly. I have liked him since middle school. Even the stray dogs on the side of the road know. If he didn't know, how could he invite me to a candlelight dinner and say such words? Joy. Dress up beautifully. Your legs are really amazing. If he didn't like me, he would have been scolded by me before he finished speaking. Sean received a commendation for his bravery when he was a teenager. The person he saved was me. In that dark alley, 5 or 6 hooligans almost took half of my life. It was Sean who descended from the sky and fought alone who saved me. But for that memory, he often felt fuzzy and would hesitantly ask me to confirm from time to time. Was it really me who saved you? Was I so brave? He seemed to have fought only that one time. After all, in front of Yvonne, he was often red-eyed and cried heartbreakably. For at that time, the rich girl Yvonne who taunted my mother for being disabled was once slapped by me in the toilet until her face was swollen. But she was as face-saving as Sean, and only dared to say that she bumped herself. The way she took revenge on me was also ridiculous. Knowing that I liked Sean, she turned around and slept with him. They broke up and got back together for several years until Yvonne left without a word. Of course, Sean didn't know any of this. All along, his attitude towards me has been very ambiguous. This house is also chosen near my company. He told his good friend Todd, this place is close to Joy. It's convenient to find her for a meal. But this is the first time I have come. His gatherings are full of rich and powerful people. I can't fit in. He often waits for me downstairs in the company and we go to eat at restaurants together. He pays the bill with a wave of his hand but puts the bill in front of me. Dude took you to improve your diet again. He is a bit condescending towards me. And he is very clear about it. My dad is just a worker on his construction site. Even I am reduced to dust in front of him. But I like him openly and honestly. He shouldn't humiliate me. Faye Vivon got angry mildly. Sean, do you have some thoughts about her? The others also stared at him to watch the show. Todd shrugged. Dude. With just one word from you, I will let her get off. This was said for Sean, and also for me. He hesitated for a long time. His face gradually sank to the bottom. He took 2 steps back, and put his arm around Devon's shoulder. Whatever. I have advised her. As long as she doesn't regret it. At the moment when several cars started and sped away, I glanced at him. Just at that moment. He also turned his head. In that short moment of eye contact, I only saw his disgust. That's fine. I am already tired of the false gentleness in his eyes. In the lobby of a star hotel, I watched Todd take the room card and walk towards me. He pulled me up without a word and took me into the elevator. Entering the room. Dimming the lights. Todd went in to wash up with a bath towel. The others were opening wine and playing music. The ceiling light was flickering with an ambiguous dim tone. I stood on the balcony and looked at the tall buildings in the distance. I don't know how long I stood there. When the wind blew in, my body was completely cold. Todd's arm hooked around my neck and pulled me closer. Looking up, there was a raised mobile phone. The others also came over with their upper bodies bare. Just one picture isn't too much, right? I cooperated and looked up and smiled. In the next second, he let go of his hand and quickly sent a message with his head down. The mobile phone in my bag was vibrating nonstop. At the moment when the light was turned off, the constantly flickering mobile phone was completely plunged into darkness. 6 the next morning, Todd hugged me and walked out of the elevator with the others. Outside the hotel, Sean and Devon were sitting in the car, looking at me coldly. His gaze slid down from my cheek and paused on the coat that Todd had draped over me. Yvonne's face was full of smug expressions. Sean avoided looking at me. When he spoke, his voice was extremely cold. When you've had enough sleep, let her go. Looking at her is an eyesore. I tightened my collar and walked in front of everyone and stretched out my hand. My voice was as steady as my calm heart at this moment. I won. Double. Laughter burst out. Sean looked back at his group of friends in astonishment. They took out a stack of cash from their pockets and stuffed it into my hands. Todd also shook his head and took out a card and gave it to me. When he looked at Sean, his tone was full of sarcasm. You really didn't stop. She bet with us that you have no feelings for her at all. We didn't believe it. Sean. No matter what. She likes you. You didn't stop her from jumping into the fire? His face turned red and then white. His lips trembled. After a long time, he finally said, "Does she deserve to like me?" I silently stuffed the money into my bag and walked in front of him expressionlessly. Make it clear. Sean. What do you mean by, does she deserve? He had a sullen face and held the steering wheel tightly. Joy. Don't let me see you again. I couldn't help but chuckle. Pressing one's hand against the car window, one leaned over and stared intently at him. In a volume that only he and I could hear, one asked him word by word, "Go back and ask your dad." In that alley, the one who was bullied and left with half a life. Was it you or me? 7 Sean stumbled after me all the way to the intersection. His face was livid as he asked me, "Joy, what do you mean by that?" I stopped and looked at him. My heart was terrifyingly calm. Traumatic amnesia. Sean. Those were the words written on your medical record back then. Have you forgotten? His face was as white as paper. And the fingers clutching my arm were turning blue. It was I who saved you. Joy. I couldn't help but sneer and pried his fingers off one by one, looking from afar at the few people chasing after us. I dialed Sean's father's phone number. A famous charitable wealthy businessman. But he was stingy with paying for my father's treatment expenses when he fell from a building due to a work-related injury. He said coldly to me, "For so many years. Do you really think you can still blackmail me now?" Even now, when the call was connected, his voice was full of ridicule. Joy. If you have time to call me. It's better to think of ways to collect medical expenses for your poor father. He had an impatient look. While you are young now, there are still quite a few ways for girls to make money. Sean stood rooted to the spot in disbelief. I said with a smile, General, if your son knew that the person who was bullied back then was him, what evidence do you have for him to believe? He has long forgotten. Hasn't he? His light words were like a heavy hammer striking Sean hard. The repeated beeping sound of a sudden hang-up was still there. But Sean staggered back a few steps. His face was covered in sweat. It's impossible. I looked at him calmly. Never had I been so full of malice towards him as I am now. I like you very much. So much so that even if you were so cowardly when you were young, I still like you the same. That group of people had followed him for many years. When they cornered him in the dark alley, they were only after money. It was he himself who was too weak. Kneeling on the ground made their evil tastes flourish. I could have walked away. But I saw the desperate look in his eyes when he looked at me. The disparity in strength caused me to break a egg in the process of struggling with them. But at least I held on until the moment the police arrived. Sean, who was carried onto the ambulance, was bleeding all over his lower body. Before he closed his eyes, he said the only sentence to me. Joy. Save me. Not after being rescued in the hospital for many days. When I woke up again, everything had changed. Reporters swarmed and surrounded me and Sean. They excitedly asked him, in such a dangerous situation, how dare you rush in alone to save someone? There was no expression on his face wrapped in gauze. Only when he looked at me was his eyes full of tenderness. I don't remember. I wanted to speak, but my dad covered my mouth tightly. Afterwards, he knelt in front of me with a face full of guilt. Your classmate's father said he would arrange a job for me. He would also pay for your medical expenses. People are poor and their aspirations are short. Moreover, he and I had long been forced to a dead end by his gambling debts. What was my reputation worth? But at that time, aside from silently swallowing this humiliation, there was actually a glimmer of relief in my heart. At least, it wasn't Sean who was being pointed at. In the blink of an eye, nearly 10 years have passed. This humiliation is like a heavy tortoise shell pressing on me. If it weren't for my dad suddenly falling from a high-rise building under construction. If it weren't for Sean's father coldly refusing all compensation. If he hadn't maliciously pulled me in to complete a gamble. I had originally planned to swallow it and never reveal it until the moment of my death. Sean leaned trembling lie against a tree by the roadside. It took him a long time to come to his senses. The look in his eyes when he looked at me was full of despair just like back then. He asked me, "What bet did you make with them?" I was silent for a moment and then smiled and patted my bulging bag. Betting on whether you will let me fall into a desperate situation. After all, everyone knew that he had been courageous and saved me when he was young. Now, compared to back then, saving me is as easy as pie. But he did nothing. He just watched me leave helplessly. Sean took 2 deep breaths and stared at me with a panicked look in his eyes. Is this your revenge on me? If I don't stop you, will you spill everything from back then? I didn't deny it. After being forced to the brink by Dwayne's father again and again, my feelings for Sean had indeed changed. What kind of love is worth me being so humble? A glimpse of amazement in my youth shouldn't cost such a high price. Especially when this price is endless. I was already tired of being a part of his and others' games. 9 after paying off the medical expenses in the hospital, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. Back in the ward, my dad was lying on the hospital bed moaning in pain. Until I walked up to him. He didn't dare to look at me directly. I tucked in the corner of his quilt for him. My tone was as calm as if I were narrating someone else's story. Sean's matter will be made public soon. I've had enough of taking it for him again. My dad's closed eyelashes trembled. The whole person seemed a bit nervous. The Dwan family will no longer agree to your unreasonable demands for such a matter. This is the last time I come to see you. From now on, I have no relatives. When I turned to leave, It seemed that my dad called me softly from behind. But I didn't stop for even a moment. In these 10 years, his insatiable greed has always made me unable to hold my head up in front of Sean. Even this time with his fall from the building. It's hard for me not to suspect that he's making a mountain out of a molehill. A few months earlier, he was constantly muttering, "This old man shows no mercy at all. I've said so many times that I want to work in an office." But he pretends to be deaf and dumb. Not only did he exchange his daughter's innocence for a stable job, now he's getting pushy. No wonder Sean's father avoids him like the plague. But it's a fact that he was kicked out of the company due to a work-related injury, and left to fend for himself. That night, I sat in front of the screen with my newly registered live streaming account. My previous account was constantly harassed from time to time because it was dug up. Of course, I knew who leaked it. Yvonne had humiliated me in person more than once. He saved you once. How long do you still want to rely on him? Why are they looking for you instead of others when girls are involved in such things? I was more astonished by her inexplicable malice towards me. At that time, I was surprised that although she was from a better background than me, she had such dirty thoughts. I liked Sean, but I had never made any excessive moves during their relationship. I even deliberately kept my distance. Until 2 years ago when she resolutely broke up. They still had an on-again, off-again relationship until now. I had never even confessed to Sean. Her malice towards me was mixed in those ugly private messages. It's time to end it. The saying that the pure are always pure is light and unsubstantiable, for someone who has endured humiliation for more than 10 years. Under the name of the Duan family abandoning workers with work-related injuries. The number of people in the live streaming room quickly exceeded 1,000. I calmly played the recording of my call with Duan's father. His every word was tearing off the mask of a hypocrite by itself. More than 10 minutes later, I saw Todd's ID enter the live streaming room. Then he sent me a private message. "Just a joke. Are you really going to ruin Sean?" I ignored it and continued to wait. Soon, Yvonne sent a message. She asked me, "What did you say to Sean? Why hasn't he answered my calls these days?" I was waiting for her. I sent her the archived photos one by one. It was about her 2 years of disappearance. Getting married and divorced quickly. Holding a small baby by the seaside abroad. This time, Yvonne directly called me. She forgot that I was live streaming. As soon as I answered, I saw Sean's ID just step into my live streaming room. What a coincidence. Isn't it? Yvonne cursed a string of vulgarities like a machine gun. I cleaned my ear. She was so angry that her voice was trembling. "Joy. What do you want?" I pretended to be stupid. "Miss Xiao. I don't understand what you are talking about. Where did those photos come from? Are you going to send them to Sean?" I asked with a smile. "Which ones are you talking about? Is it about you getting married quickly abroad and having a baby?" She let out a shrill scream. And even my eardrum vibrated. I continued to speak. "Didn't you tell Sean? You are being ambiguous with him now. You just want to test how much he can tolerate." The proud school beauty back then got pregnant after a one-night stand with one of Sean's friends. But she still had to put on an air of resolutely breaking up. Coincidentally, she met a sucker abroad and got married quickly. After the baby was born, the other party secretly did a paternity test and then got divorced in a rage. I couldn't help but ask her, "Aren't you afraid that Sean will also do a paternity test if you plan to let him be a sucker?" And I'm live streaming. Miss Xiao. 77 Sean exited the live streaming room. This made me a little disappointed. After all, the revelations I was going to show him next. The commentaria was frantically trying to figure out Yvonne's identity. Soon, both her name and pictures were revealed. But they were deleted completely in a very short time. A message popped up for me. It was from Sean. "Vent your anger on me. Don't hurt Yvonne." I couldn't help but sneer. I had been a little hesitant before. But now with a flick of my hand, I sent it out. 10 years ago, Sean received a guaranteed admission and recognition for his courageous act. But the truth may not be like this. The few pieces of paper on the table were light. But they carried too much. In my lifetime, I never thought I would need to prove myself like this. On those few pieces of paper were the examination certificates I had done in the hospital recently. In black and white. It proved my innocence. I have never had any sexual intercourse until now. And the written records of the emergency treatment process back then. I only made public my own diagnosis certificate. But it was enough to complement and explain everything. At the same time, I also released the surveillance and diagnosis after my father's fall. When I spoke again, my throat was a little dry. The purpose of my publishing these is to hope that the Duan family will come forward and bear the follow-up treatment expenses for my father. And not to cooperate with Mr. Sean to play the role of a victim rescued by him on any occasion. Before I finished speaking, the live streaming had been interrupted. Todd's messages rushed in frantically. Are you saying that Sean was by those men back then? Joy. Do you know what the consequences of spreading rumors are? Just because of a bet. Is it worth it? I didn't think twice and directly blocked and deleted him. Anyway, things had already come to this point. I simply packaged all of Yvonne's photos and sent them to Sean. In the middle of sending, a small red dot indicating that I had been blocked by the other party appeared. I almost laughed out loud. After so many years, he was still so cowardly. Along the way, I received many threatening messages. Duan's father's calls came one after another. I didn't block him either. I just watched him jump up and down in a hurry. When I returned to the place where I rented, I saw Sean's car parked at the entrance of the alley from afar. He opened the car door and got out. His voice was trembling when he spoke. Joy. Why? I pulled some distance away from him and looked at him coldly. What are you referring to? Be more specific. He trembled and looked up. There were glistening tears in his eyes. Crying at every turn hadn't changed at all. Joy. Have I done anything excessive to you these years? Why are you treating me like this? He lowered his head and sniffled, rambling on about all the things he had done for me. He persuaded his father to pay my college tuition and took me to restaurants everywhere. Even during his relationship with Yvonne, he would casually give me some gifts from time to time. But he didn't mention at all how he had made me feel so insignificant in these 10 years. I slowly raised my head and stared at him. In sophomore year, both Yvonne and I were on the list for that bonus evaluation. Right? His face turned pale all of a sudden. I sneered twice. You went to the school office and said that what happened to me in the past was not suitable to represent the image of the department. Even though Yvonne and I were from different departments and had the same opportunity. And I didn't even pose a threat to her. But as soon as Yvonne opened her mouth, he immediately went to expose my shortcomings. I was right outside the door and heard everything clearly. Sean hung his head. After a long time, he slowly looked at me. You know everything and still stay by my side. You must have been thinking about how to retaliate against me for a long time. Right? I couldn't help but laugh and nod. Yes. If I had stopped liking you earlier, and seen you clearly earlier, maybe I should have slapped you back then. He was trembling all over like a sack of chaff. His eyes were full of terrified tears. Why bring it up after so long? Since you have liked me for so many years, wouldn't it be better to keep it hidden all the time? Joy. You saved me. Why can't you save me to the end? I was stunned. At that moment, the doubts in my heart were completely dispelled. I tried my best to my impulse. But I still couldn't help but slap him twice. You have always remembered, right? That so-called amnesia after trauma is all fake. He stood still without even making a move to cover his face. Tears fell to the ground drop by drop. His voice trembled like fallen leaves. What else could I do? As a man, encountering such a thing. 13 in those few evenings. Sean parked his car at the entrance of the alley. Sometimes when I passed by in front of him, he just slightly raised his head and looked at me from the car window. He didn't say anything. After that live streaming, my dad was transferred to a private hospital. The Duan family wouldn't let him be in the limelight. He didn't send me any more messages either. After all, he had raised me. Now that there was no more value to be exploited, Sean's group of friends would send me messages from time to time, secretly inquiring about the details of that year. One by one, their assets were inferior to the Duan family's. Usually, they were a bit flattering to Sean. Now they were all eager to kick him when he was down. I calmly deleted them one by one. I took screenshots of the disgusting words and saved them. When I saw Sean sitting downstairs motionless again, I knocked on the car window and held it up in front of him. Stay away from these people. His face paled a bit, but he forced a wry smile. Why do you still care about me like this? Don't you just want them to laugh at me? He buried his head deeply. His voice was full of dejection. Joy. I actually liked you a long time ago. I nodded slightly. Then I remembered that he couldn't see me now. Otherwise, why would I transfer to such an ordinary high school? He said that he caught a glimpse of me outside the tutoring room. At that time, I was leaving in a hurry with my school bag on my back. That glance made his heart itch. After pestering a lot, he was finally able to transfer. I looked for opportunities to chat with you every day, thinking that maybe it would happen naturally when we graduated. He was trembling slightly all over. Joy. If it weren't for you, if I hadn't transferred, I think he was regretting that if he hadn't met me, he might have been spared from that disaster. Those people wouldn't have come after you, right? I calmly asked the deepest sentence in his heart. 14. He looked up in a panic and looked at me with some difficulty. Sometimes I can't tell whether I hate you or. His words didn't need to be made clearer. I just smiled and turned to leave. No wonder he was ambiguous towards me. In the 10 years after that incident, on the one hand, he said that we could be considered childhood sweethearts. On the other hand, he distanced himself from me. For all the boys who approached me, he was always sarcastic. It wouldn't take long for them to stay away from me. And as soon as Yvonne showed a hint of jealousy, he would tease me. Why are you always following me? Can't you even find a man? His rare courage was all used in testing me. Back then, why can't I remember anything? Joy. I really saved you, right? In my repeated confirmations, he gradually relaxed. Until now, he could use the excuse of a bet to expose my embarrassing situation to everyone. When my father was being rescued in the emergency room, when I called him anxiously for help, he was at the airport holding flowers and waiting for Yvonne's return. His tone on the phone was unhurried. Joy. Don't worry. I will definitely help you. This matter is definitely not what you think. How can my dad make things difficult for your father and daughter? Then he sent a message in the group with his buddies. Let's make a bet. Didn't they all say I can't handle Joy? 50,000 for each person. How about if I make her lie obediently in my arms? Todd took a screenshot and sent it to me. He still couldn't help but tease. Unfortunately, those people regarded him as a joke from the beginning to the end. You said it would have been better if you had been honest with me back then. How old are you and still playing the game of secret love? Sean is busy showing loyalty to Yvonne. I was so angry and anxious at that time that all the blood in my body rushed to my head. But when I calmed down, I couldn't help but laugh. Desolate lie. Since that's the case, it seems that it's not wrong for me to make more money from him. I asked Todd to pull those friends into a separate group. On the way to that date with Sean, I got straight to the point. Let's make a bet. You guys come to the hotel room with me. As long as Sean stops me, I'll lose 10,000 to each of you. Todd sent the first message. Aren't you afraid that we'll really do it? We all know about what happened to you back then. I might still have some illusions about Sean when I typed those words. Back then he was willing to risk half his life to save me. 15. It was more than half a month after the live streaming that Duan's father came to find me. He still looked kind and gentle. His tone was mild when he spoke. It was completely different from his aggressive attitude on the phone. Joy. Your father is definitely going to be permanently disabled. His meaning was very simple. Even if he paid a sum of money, it wouldn't be enough to support him for the rest of his life. Publicly apologize to Sean. Admit that you were just confused for a moment and wanted to extort more money. He asked me to admit it again. I laughed loudly. Laughing so hard that I almost fell over backward. Even though the car door was closed immediately after he got off, I still saw Sean sitting in the back seat with his head down. As cowardly as ever. The conditions offered by Dwayne's father seemed very generous. Not only would he take care of my dad for the rest of his life, but he would also arrange a nominal position for me. I heard from Sean that you have always wanted to pursue further studies. This is an opportunity. After he finished speaking, he raised his wrist to look at the time. At the same time, he asked someone to bring over the drafted agreement. Sign it. Sean said that you two can try getting along. When he said this, he frowned slightly. Obviously he didn't agree. But for now it was a stopgap measure. I nodded. I took the agreement and read it carefully from beginning to end. Then I walked over and knocked on the car window. Sean's face turned pale. He rolled down the window and tried his best to maintain a calm expression. I can accompany you abroad for a while. I smiled and stuffed the agreement into his hand, watching his expression shatter in an instant. What should I do? I don't want to. And those little hoodlums who bullied you have been following you for more than half a year. I reached out and straightened his somewhat messy shirt collar. Even if you didn't transfer schools, they wouldn't let you go. Sean, when will you be like a man? 16. I believed that his moment of being moved when he caught a glimpse outside the tutoring room was real. I also knew that in that year, Dwayne's father's company was laying off employees crazily, cutting off many people's livelihoods. Many people threatened to teach him a lesson. But this lesson fell on his naturally cowardly son. They originally just wanted to empty his pockets. It was he himself who knelt on the ground and kept begging for mercy. When he called Dwayne's father, all he got was a cold rebuke. I only have this one son. You do as you see fit. Those with nothing to lose are not afraid of those with everything to lose. He probably never thought there would be such a humiliating result. I wasn't just passing by chance either. A few days earlier, Sean had been worriedly noticing that those people had discovered him and were following him all the time. He found all kinds of reasons to stay by my side. But just on that day, I stopped to answer my father's call, and he was busy replying to messages with his head down and walked into that alley. He lay on the ground and looked at me. There was a glimmer of hope for help in his eyes. I'm afraid that he had already thought of all the escape routes at that time. The more cowardly a person is, the more they know how to survive. On the contrary, it was my little bit of love that became a bargaining chip for him to manipulate at will. Your legs are really amazing. I remembered what he said when he invited me to a candlelight dinner, and couldn't help but laugh. He knew about the ugly scar on my leg. At this moment, I can also return all his intentional actions to him. I watched him look down at the agreement in a panic. Sean, do you want me to help you tell Yvonne that you have had a pure love for several years? But in fact it's because you are simply incapable. In an instant, his face turned extremely pale. He looked up in panic at Dwayne's father not far away. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. You see, with a preconceived impression. No matter what I say, you can't defend yourself. Just like in the past many years. He spoke lightly. About Joy's matter. It was enough to leave everyone with endless speculation. He always added a sentence. Fortunately, I showed up at that time. He had told lies for so long that even he himself believed them. 17. More than half a month later, I was waiting at the airport with my luggage. On the TV screen was a report of Dwayne's father being interviewed by the media. He hung his head. His hair was all white. He still looked kind and gentle. When asked about the humiliation his son suffered back then, his face froze for a moment. Then he quickly changed the topic. Yvonne entered the Dwayne family holding an unknown child. No marriage certificate. No wedding. She just talked with relish about how she was pregnant and ran away. And Sean had been chasing her for several years in the live streaming. Occasionally, the live streaming screen would go black. The Dwayne family couldn't do anything about her. But they needed her to be another shield. And Sean, who was portrayed as a modern de Casanova by her, hadn't shown up for a long time. Todd told me that he was staying in a private mental hospital. Every day he curled up in the corner, muttering in fear, "Save me. Save me." The past that was deeply hidden in his heart followed him like a shadow. As for me, I still took a large sum of compensation from Dwayne's father, although the agreement said it was a gratuitous sponsorship. But this sum of money was enough for me to pursue further studies without worrying about food and clothing. Even if I just lay back and did nothing, he had only one condition: don't come back. As if as long as I didn't appear, Sean could still be the son he cared for. The world of the rich is full of lies and deceptions. I was fortunate to be immersed in it for several years. Now it's time to completely get out. When I boarded the flight, I looked at the last message on my phone. It was sent by Sean more than half a month ago. "Can you save me one more time?" Looking at this line at this moment, I seemed to see the despair when he curled up and typed each word. Unfortunately, no one saved him this time. There's no such good luck that someone is always willing to love him every time.